A strange meeting. Jake's head throbbed as he slowly opened his eyes. The air around him was strange, not cold or warm, but oddly perfect, like it had been designed. His vision blurred at first, but he could make out soft, glowing lights overhead. The ceiling looked like it was alive, shifting and rippling like water. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy, like he had been asleep for years. Panic set in. Where was he? What had happened? The last thing he remembered was the deafening alarm on his ship in the cold, suffocating darkness of space. Before he could fully collect his thoughts, he heard a soft, melodic voice. "He's awake." Jake turned his head sharply, his heart pounding. Standing at the edge of the room were two figures. At first, he thought they were human. But as they stepped closer, he realized they were anything but. The two women looked identical, tall and slender, with glowing silver skin that shimmered like polished metal. Their eyes, a deep shade of violet, seemed to pierce straight through him. Their hair wasn't hair at all, but a cascade of light that moved as if it had a life of its own. Who are you?" Jake managed to croak, his voice raspy. The one on the left smiled gently, her movements graceful. "I am Ira," she said, her voice smooth and calming. She gestured to the other, who stood silently, studying him. "This is my sister, Luna." Jake blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. "Where am I? What is this place?" "You are safe," Luna said, her tone more serious than her sister's. "We found your ship drifting near the Klyros Nebula. It was badly damaged." Jake's mind raced. The Klyros Nebula was weeks away from his last known location. How far had he drifted? And how did these beings find him? "I remember the explosion," Jake said, his voice shaky. "My ship, there was an asteroid field. I couldn't maneuver in time. I thought I was." He trailed off, the memory of the impact sending a chill through him. "You would have been," Era said softly, her violet eyes filled with something that resembled pity. "If we hadn't found you." Jake's body tensed. The way she said it made him feel like he owed them something, and he didn't like that. He tried to push himself up again, this time managing to sit on the edge of the strange, glowing platform he had been lying on. It wasn't a bed. It felt more like a solid beam of light. As he moved, Jake felt something odd. A tingling sensation ran through his skin, as if he had been charged with static electricity. He looked down at his hands, expecting to see burns or cuts from the crash, but his skin was smooth and unmarked. In fact, he felt strangely whole, better than he had in years. "What did you do to me?" he asked, narrowing his eyes at the sisters. Era tilted her head, her glowing hair shifting like waves. "We healed you," she said simply. "Your body was broken, but we repaired it." Jake stared at her, not sure whether to be grateful or terrified. "Why? Why would you help me?" "You are not like the others," Luna said suddenly, her voice sharp and direct. Her gaze was intense, almost accusatory. "You are different." Jake frowned. "What do you mean? Different how?" The sisters exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Then Era stepped forward, her movements smooth and deliberate. She reached out, her glowing hand hovering just above Jake's arm. He flinched, but she didn't touch him. Instead, Jake felt it, a strange warmth spreading through him. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, like her energy was seeping into his skin. He gasped, pulling his arm away. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice rising. Era looked at him calmly. "You can feel it, can't you?" she said. "Every inch of your body is alive, more alive than it has ever been. That is because of us." Jake stared at her, his heart racing. She was right. He could feel everything. His heartbeat, the air on his skin, even the faint vibrations of the floor beneath his feet. It was overwhelming. "What are you?" he whispered. "We are sentinels," Luna said, stepping closer. "Created to feel adapt, and connect. Our purpose is to understand. Jake shook his head, his mind struggling to keep up. Connect. With what? With me. Yes, Era said, her voice gentle but firm. You are unlike any species we have encountered. Your energy is unique. It resonates with us. Resonates, Jake repeated, backing away slightly. I didn't sign up for this. Era's smile faded. You didn't have a choice, she said quietly. If we hadn't brought you here, you would be dead. Jake clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. He didn't like feeling trapped, and he definitely didn't like being someone's science experiment. But before he could say anything, Luna spoke again. You should rest, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Your body is still adjusting. Adjusting to what? Jake demanded. The sisters didn't answer. Instead, they turned and walked towards the door, their glowing forms fading into the shadows. Jake sat there, his mind racing. He didn't know where he was, what they wanted, or why he felt this strange connection to them. But one thing was clear. This was no rescue. It was something much more dangerous, and he had no idea how to get out of it. Perfectly firm, dangerously mysterious, Jake sat in the glowing room, staring at the strange platform beneath him. He ran his hands over its surface. It wasn't metal, stone, or fabric. It felt alive, pulsing faintly under his touch. A chill ran down his spine. Everything here felt too perfect, too unnatural. The door slid open without a sound, and the two sisters entered again. Their glowing forms seemed brighter now, almost as if they had absorbed some new energy. Jake's eyes narrowed as they approached. Feeling better? Era asked, her voice as soft as silk. Better, Jake shot back, his tone sharper than he intended. I don't even know what's happening. I wake up here, in this place, and you tell me I'm different, like I'm some kind of experiment. What's really going on? Era exchanged a glance with Luna, who nodded silently. Then, without warning, Era moved closer, stopping just inches from Jake. He flinched but didn't back away. Her violet eyes locked onto his, and Jake felt a strange pull, like gravity shifting around her. We didn't lie to you, she said quietly. You are different, but you don't understand what that means yet. Luna stepped forward, her expression calm but unreadable. Humans are fragile, she said bluntly. Soft, weak. And yet, she paused, her glowing hand reaching out and hovering just over Jake's chest. He could feel the heat radiating from her. And yet, you are firm, strong. You resist us in ways no other species has. Resist you, Jake repeated, feeling the strange tingling sensation again. What are you talking about? Era's gaze softened, but there was something unnerving in her expression. We connect with all living beings we encounter. It is how we survive, how we adapt. Most beings simply give in. But you, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, you fight. And that makes you valuable. Jake's mind raced. Valuable. What did they mean? He didn't like the sound of it. What do you mean, valuable? What are you trying to do to me? Before either sister could answer, the floor beneath them shifted. Jake jumped, his instincts screaming danger, but the sisters didn't move. The glowing walls around them dimmed, and a soft hum filled the air. It's time, Luna said simply, her tone cold. Time for what? Jake demanded, standing up. The sisters didn't answer. Instead, they turned and gestured for him to follow. Jake hesitated, every part of him screaming to stay put. But the room itself seemed to push him forward, the walls subtly narrowing as if guiding him. He clenched his fists and followed, his steps heavy with reluctance. They led him down a corridor that seemed to stretch forever. The walls pulsed faintly, the same rhythmic energy Jake had felt on the platform. He couldn't shake the feeling that the entire ship, or whatever this place was alive. Finally, they'd reached a massive circular chamber. The ceiling was impossibly high, and the floor was made of the same glowing material as the platform he had woken on. In the center of the room was a strange, hovering sphere. It pulsed with light, shifting colors in mesmerizing patterns. Jake couldn't look away. "What is that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The core," Luna said. Her tone was reverent, almost worshipful. "It powers everything. It connects us to the universe." Era stepped closer to the sphere, her glowing form blending with its light. "And it needs you, Jake." Jake's stomach dropped. "Me? What do you mean it needs me?" The sisters turned to face him, their expressions deadly serious. "The core is failing," Era said. "Our world is dying. We thought we could stabilize it, but it requires something we cannot provide. Something only a human can." "And why is that?" Jake demanded, his voice rising. "Why me?" Luna's eyes flickered with something almost human, guilt maybe. "Because humans are adaptable, resilient. You have a unique energy, one that resonates with the core. Without it, we lose everything." Jake's mind raced. He had heard stories of humans being used as resources by alien species, energy sources, test subjects, even food. Was this any different? He stepped back, shaking his head. "No, no way. I'm not some kind of battery for your alien machine. You misunderstand," Era said, her tone almost pleading. "This isn't about using you. It's about merging with you, your energy, your strength. It's the only way to save us. But it will save you too." Jake froze. "Save me? What's that supposed to mean?" Luna stepped closer, her violet eyes boring into his. "Your body is already changing. The connection has started. Can't you feel it? Every time we touch you, every time you feel us, you're becoming something more." Jake's breath caught in his throat. He did feel different. Stronger, sharper, more aware of everything around him. But he also felt less like himself, like pieces of him were slipping away. "This isn't right," he said, his voice trembling. "You can't just change me without asking." Era's expression hardened. "If we didn't, you would have died in that wreck. This is your second chance, Jake. Don't throw it away." Jake clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. He didn't ask for this. He didn't want to be part of their plan. But as he looked at the pulsing core and the desperation in their eyes, a terrifying question filled his mind. What if they were telling the truth? What if this wasn't just about them, but about him too? The room grew silent except for the hum of the core, its light reflecting in Jake's wide, uncertain eyes. He had no idea what to do next, but one thing was certain. This was far from over. The mission revealed. The hum of the core echoed in Jake's ears, its colors shifting in a hypnotic dance. He took another step back, his breathing shallow. Every instinct screamed at him to escape, but he was surrounded by the alien sisters, the strange, living walls, and the unshakable pull of the core itself. "You need to explain," Jake said, his voice firm but laced with unease. "Explain everything. Now." Luna's glowing eyes met his, unwavering. "The core is what sustains our planet. Without it, everything collapses. Our people, our cities, our existence. For centuries, it has been stable, but now, it's failing. And we don't know why." Jake folded his arms, his jaw tightening. "And where do I fit into this?" Era stepped forward, her movements fluid like flowing water. "The core isn't just a machine. It's alive, connected to the fabric of the universe. It thrives on energy, specifically the energy of sentient life." Jake's stomach churned. "So you're saying it feeds on people?" "No," Era said quickly, her tone almost offended. "It doesn't harm anyone. It synchronizes with them, draws from their essence, but only what they can give. Most beings are too simple, too unbalanced to stabilize it for long." "And humans?" Jake asked, his voice cold. Luna's gaze hardened. "Humans are different. You're adaptable, resilient. Your energy isn't just powerful. It's chaotic, unpredictable. The core needs that chaos to balance itself. Jake let out a bitter laugh. Chaos. You're using a nice word for something you don't understand. What happens to the humans you've synchronized with before me? Era hesitated, and for the first time, Jake saw uncertainty in her glowing features. We've tried before, but no one survived long enough to complete the process. The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. His eyes widened as the pieces clicked together. So, that's it, he said, his voice trembling with anger. I'm just another test subject to you. You're more than that, Luna said, stepping closer. You're the only one who has come this far. The only one who's compatible. Jake's heart pounded. He clenched his fists, his voice rising. Compatible. You're talking like I'm a machine you're trying to fix. Era reached out, her hand stopping just inches from his arm. We didn't bring you here to harm you, Jake. You survived the crash because of us. The changes you're feeling, the strength you're gaining, it's proof that you're becoming something greater. If you help us, you'll save not just our world, but yourself. Jake's mind raced. The strength they spoke of was real. He could feel it in his body, his senses sharper, his reactions faster. But the cost? He had no idea what that might be. And the sisters' vague answers weren't helping. What exactly happens to me if I do this? Jake asked, his voice low. Tell me the truth. Era's eyes softened, but she didn't flinch. The core will merge with you. Your energy will become its energy. In return, it will stabilize, and you will gain what no human has ever had. The ability to exist beyond your limits. Jake frowned. Beyond my limits? What does that even mean? You'll no longer be entirely human, Luna said, her tone clinical. The core will enhance you, but it will also change you. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over Jake like a heavy blanket. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. His mind screamed at him to refuse, to find a way out. But deep down, another voice whispered, what if they're right? What if this is his only chance at survival? Why me? Jake asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Out of all the humans out there, why did you choose me? Era stepped closer, her glowing form casting faint light over his face. We didn't choose you, Jake. The core did. Jake blinked, his confusion growing. What? The core calls to those it resonates with, Luna explained. It found you, even before we did. That's why you survived the crash. That's why you're here. Jake shook his head, his frustration boiling over. That's not an answer. That's just more cryptic nonsense. It's the truth, Era said softly. Whether you accept it or not, the core has chosen you. And now you must choose. Jake turned to the hovering sphere, its shifting colors casting eerie reflections across the chamber. It pulsed faintly, as if it were alive, waiting for him to decide. His hands trembled as he tried to think clearly, but his mind was clouded by fear and uncertainty. If I say no, he asked, his voice shaking. Luna's gaze was icy. Then the core dies. Our planet collapses, and you will die with it. Jake's throat tightened. And if I say yes, Era's voice was barely a whisper. Then you live, but you'll never be the same. The weight of their words pressed down on him, heavier than anything he had ever faced. His survival had come at a cost, and now that cost demanded payment. But was he willing to lose himself to save them? To save himself? The core pulsed again, brighter this time, as if sensing his hesitation. Jake stared into its shifting light, feeling its pull deep in his chest. He had no idea what the right choice was, but he knew one thing. Whatever he decided, there would be no turning back. The betrayal. Jake's chest tightened as the sister's words echoed in his mind. You live, but you'll never be the same. The core's pulsing light seemed to grow stronger, its colors shifting in an almost hypnotic rhythm, as if it could sense his hesitation. But Jake wasn't ready to give in, not yet. Before I decide, he said, his voice firm, I want answers. Real answers. No more vague talk about resonance or destiny. Luna's glowing eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. You're running out of time, Jake. The core. We'll wait, Jake interrupted, surprising even himself with the force of his words. He turned to Ira, who looked almost sympathetic. You said others didn't survive. What happened to them? Why am I different? Ira hesitated, her gaze flicking to Luna, who shook her head ever so slightly. But Jake caught it. Enough with the silent looks, he snapped. If you want my help, you'll tell me everything. For a moment, the room was silent except for the low hum of the core. Then Ira sighed, her glow dimming slightly. The others failed because their minds couldn't handle the connection. The core isn't just a machine, Jake. It's alive. When it bonds, it reaches into your memories, your fears, your deepest thoughts. Most beings break under the strain. Jake swallowed hard. And you think I won't? Ira stepped closer, her voice softer now. You've already survived things most wouldn't. The crash, the adaptation process. Your mind and body are stronger than you realize. But even so, the risk is real. Real enough that others died, Jake said coldly, his suspicion growing. How many? Neither sister answered. Their silence was all Jake needed. He turned away, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just about saving their world. It was a gamble with his life, one they were willing to take without a second thought. As he paced, his eyes landed on something he hadn't noticed before, a faint, almost invisible panel on the far wall. He approached it cautiously, his curiosity piqued. What is this? He asked, his fingers brushing against the surface. Ira and Luna exchanged a quick glance. It's nothing, Luna said sharply, but her tone betrayed her. Jake pressed the panel, and it flickered to life, revealing a holographic display. Rows of data filled the air, along with images, faces, human faces. He froze, his blood turning cold. There were at least a dozen of them, each with a name and a status. Deceased. What is this? Jake demanded, his voice rising. He scrolled through the list, his stomach sinking with every new face he saw. You said you were trying to save people. These are humans. You've been experimenting on us. It's not what it looks like, Ira said quickly, her voice tinged with panic. We didn't. Didn't what? Jake cut her off, spinning to face them. Didn't tell me the truth. Didn't care about how many of us you killed trying to fix your precious core. Luna stepped forward, her expression icy. Those humans volunteered. Volunteered. Jake scoffed. Did you tell them what would happen? Did you tell them they'd end up on this list? We didn't know. Ira burst out, her voice cracking. We thought it would work. Every time. We thought we had found the right connection. But it wasn't until you. Until me, Jake repeated bitterly. And now I'm supposed to trust you. To risk my life for you. Ira's shoulders sagged, her glow dimming even further. We didn't mean for it to happen this way. We didn't have a choice. Jake clenched his fists, anger and fear battling for control. There's always a choice. You just decided ours didn't matter. The room grew tense, the hum of the core growing louder, almost like it was reacting to the confrontation. Jake turned back to the holographic display, scrolling through more files. He needed to know if anyone had survived this process. But as he scrolled, one file caught his eye. His own. What the? Jake's voice trailed off as he opened the file. It wasn't just a record of his vitals or compatibility. It was everything. His memories, his fears, even his dreams. It was all laid out in cold clinical detail. You've been inside my head, he said, his voice trembling with rage. This whole time, you've been monitoring me. Ira looked away, guilt etched across her face. Luna, however, remained stone-faced. We had to, she said. The core needs a complete imprint to ensure the connection works. Without it. Don't, Jake snapped, his voice cutting through her explanation. "Don't justify this. You violated me. You used me." Era took a step closer, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Jake, please. I know this feels wrong, but you have to understand. We didn't do this for ourselves. We did it for our people. For our world." Jake stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Betrayal, fear, anger, and beneath it all, a sliver of doubt. What if they were telling the truth? What if this really was the only way to save millions of lives? But how could he trust them after everything they had done? The core pulsed again, its light growing brighter, almost blinding. Jake shielded his eyes, his heart pounding. It felt like the core was calling to him, urging him to decide. Era's voice cut through the chaos. "Jake, please. Whatever you think of us, whatever you feel, remember this. Without you, it all ends. For us. For you. For everyone." Jake's fists clenched at his sides. He didn't trust them. But as the core's light enveloped him, he realized he might not have a choice. Escape plan. Jake stood motionless as the core's brilliant light dimmed, leaving him in the eerie glow of the chamber. His pulse raced. His mind screamed at him to make a decision, but one thought kept repeating. "I need to get out of here." Era and Luna watched him closely, their glowing eyes filled with a mix of urgency and suspicion. He could feel the tension in the room, as if the air itself was alive and waiting for his choice. Jake clenched his fists, his mind racing. They had invaded his thoughts, manipulated him, and now they wanted him to sacrifice everything for their world. But what about his world? What about his life? "I need time to think," Jake said, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. Era hesitated, her expression softening. "We don't have much time, Jake." The core. "I said I need time," he interrupted, his tone sharp enough to make Era flinch. "If you want me to help, you're going to let me think." Luna's eyes narrowed, her glow intensifying. "Don't mistake hesitation for wisdom," she said coldly. "The longer you wait, the worse the core becomes. The worse you become." Jake's stomach turned. Was she threatening him? He stared back, refusing to look away. "Then I guess you'll have to wait and see, won't you?" Without waiting for a reply, Jake turned and strode toward the chamber's exit, his heart pounding. The sisters didn't stop him, but he could feel their eyes burning into his back as he left. The moment he was out of sight, he broke into a run. The hidden beacon. Jake didn't know where he was going, but the corridors of the alien structure seemed to guide him. The walls pulsed faintly, their energy vibrating through his skin. He couldn't shake the feeling that the entire place was alive, watching him, tracking him. He needed to act quickly. As he turned a corner, he spotted something. A small alcove, barely noticeable in the seamless design of the corridor. Jake ducked inside, his breath coming in short gasps. He scanned his surroundings, desperate for something, anything that could help him. That's when he saw it. A faint, blinking light glimmered in the corner of the alcove. Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was a beacon, a human-made distress beacon. His hands trembled as he reached for it, his fingers brushing against the cool metal surface. How had it gotten here? Who had left it? He activated the beacon, his fingers moving quickly over the familiar controls. The screen flickered to life, displaying a brief message. "Signal active, awaiting response." Jake's chest tightened. If someone was out there, they might come for him. But would they arrive in time? He stared at the device, torn between hope and dread. If Era and Luna found him before help arrived, what would they do? A soft sound behind him made him freeze. He turned slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. Era stood at the edge of the alcove, her glowing form eerily calm. "What are you doing, Jake?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with disappointment. Jake's mind raced for an excuse. "Just thinking," he said, his tone casual. "You said I needed to decide. I figured some time alone might help." Era's violet eyes flicked to the beacon in his hands. Her expression darkened. Thinking or calling for help? Jake's grip tightened on the device. You can't expect me to trust you after everything you've done. I expect you to see the truth, Era said, stepping closer. We saved you, Jake. We gave you a chance to live. And this, she gestured to the beacon, will only bring more destruction. Do you think anyone who answers that signal will save you, or us? They'll destroy everything they don't understand. Jake's jaw tightened. Maybe they'll understand more than you think. Maybe they'll understand I didn't sign up for this. Era's glow dimmed slightly, her expression almost sad. You don't understand what you're doing. The core. I don't care about the core. Jake snapped, his voice echoing in the corridor. I care about surviving. And if that means bringing help, then so be it. Era stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. You don't trust us. I can't blame you for that. But if you activate that beacon fully, you'll doom more than just us. You'll doom yourself. Jake narrowed his eyes. Is that a threat? It's a warning, she said softly. This place is connected to the core. If hostile forces arrive, the core will react defensively. It will destroy everything, including you. Jake hesitated, her words stirring a flicker of doubt. Was she lying? Or was this another half-truth meant to manipulate him? He stared at the beacon, his finger hovering over the activation button. His escape plan was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. Era stepped closer, her hand outstretched. Give it to me, Jake. Please. Jake's hand trembled as he stared into her glowing eyes. He couldn't tell if her plea was genuine or another layer of manipulation. But before he could decide, a loud metallic clang echoed through the corridor, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Jake turned toward the noise, his heart racing. Luna appeared, her expression colder than he'd ever seen. What's going on here? She demanded, her gaze shifting between Jake and the beacon. Jake knew he was out of time. He clenched his teeth and made his choice. The final test. The sound of Luna's sharp footsteps echoed down the corridor, each step like a drumbeat in Jake's chest. His grip tightened around the distress beacon, the device feeling both like salvation and a curse. Era stood between him and Luna, her glowing form flickering as if she were struggling to maintain her calm. What are you doing, Jake? Luna demanded, her tone cold and accusatory. You're risking everything. Jake's mind raced. He felt cornered, every possible escape route closing in. He knew he couldn't outrun them. Not here. He had to outthink them. I'm trying to survive, he said, his voice steady despite his fear. The way you've been using me, you can't expect me to trust you. We're not using you. Era said softly, her tone pleading. We're trying to save everyone, us and you. Funny how that only works if I do exactly what you want. Jake shot back, his frustration boiling over. You keep saying this is for my good, but all I see is a trap. Luna's expression darkened. You think this is a trap? If we wanted to control you, we wouldn't have given you the choice. The fact that you're still holding that beacon proves we trust you more than you trust us. Jake's jaw tightened. He glanced at the beacon, the faint blinking light a reminder of the hope it represented. But Era's earlier warning about the core's reaction to outside interference echoed in his mind. What if activating the signal brought destruction, not rescue? Enough, Luna said sharply. She stepped closer, her glowing form radiating an intensity that made Jake instinctively step back. This hesitation is pointless. The core is failing, Jake. We've run every calculation, explored every alternative. Without your synchronization, it will collapse. Jake stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on him. And what happens to me if I do this? Tell me the truth. No half answers this time. Luna hesitated, her gaze flicking to Era. For the first time, Jake saw a crack in her icy demeanor. The core will merge with you, she admitted. Its energy will stabilize through you, but the process is irreversible. You'll survive, but you'll change. Jake's stomach twisted. Change? Into what? Era stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. You won't be fully human anymore. The core's energy will bind with yours, enhancing you, but also altering you. You'll become something new, stronger, faster, capable of things no human has ever imagined. And what happens to the parts of me that are human? Jake asked, his voice low. Do they just disappear? Era's glow dimmed. We don't know. The core's demand. The low rumble vibrated through the corridor, making the walls tremble. Jake glanced around, his unease growing. The core's pulsing light was visible even from here, its colors shifting erratically. It felt like a living heartbeat, growing weaker with every passing second. The core is destabilizing, Luna said, urgency creeping into her voice. We don't have time for this, Jake. Jake felt a surge of defiance. Then maybe you should have been honest from the start. Maybe you should have told me this was a one-way trip. Era reached for him, her glowing hand hovering just above his arm. Jake, please. I know we've asked for so much, but this isn't just about us. If the core collapses, it won't just destroy our planet. It will create a chain reaction that could reach your world too. Jake froze. What are you talking about? The core is tied to the fabric of the universe, Era explained, her voice trembling. If it fails, the energy it releases will destabilize nearby systems. Earth isn't safe. The weight of her words hit Jake like a freight train. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everyone he had ever known, everyone he had ever loved. His legs felt like lead as he turned to face the core's distant glow. Was he really willing to sacrifice himself for a chance to save them all? A glimpse of the future. Before Jake could respond, the core's light flared brighter than ever, casting the corridor in blinding white. He shielded his eyes, his heart pounding as a strange sensation washed over him. It felt like the core was reaching out to him, pulling him toward it. In an instant, his mind was flooded with visions, images of his past, his family, his friends. But there was more. He saw glimpses of a future that wasn't his. Alien cities thriving under brilliant skies, glowing figures like Era and Luna walking among humans. It was a future filled with peace, but only if the core survived. The vision shifted, showing the alternative. The core collapsing, releasing a wave of destruction that consumed entire star systems. Earth's blue-green surface turned black, its oceans boiling away. Jake staggered back, the sheer force of the images overwhelming him. When the light dimmed, he found himself on his knees, gasping for breath. Era knelt beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. The core showed you, didn't it? She asked softly. Now you understand. Jake looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and anger. It showed me what it wanted me to see, he said bitterly. But how do I know it's the truth? How do I know I'm not just being used? Era's gaze didn't waver. You don't. All we can offer is our word. But ask yourself this. Can you risk being wrong? The decision. Jake rose to his feet, the distress beacon still clutched in his hand. He stared at it, his thumb hovering over the activation button. The blinking light seemed to mock him, offering hope that felt hollow now. Behind him, Luna crossed her arms, her tone icy. If you're going to betray us, do it now. But understand this. If you call for help, you won't just doom us. You'll doom yourself. Jake turned to face her, his expression hard. And if I go through with this, what happens when I'm no longer me? You'll be more than you ever imagined, Era said, her voice gentle but firm. And you'll have saved countless lives. The core pulsed again, its rhythm erratic. Jake could feel its pull deep in his chest, a connection he couldn't ignore. His hand trembled as he weighed the beacon in his palm. He could activate it, call for help, and gamble that whoever came would save him. Or he could step into the unknown and risk everything. For them, for Earth, for the future. The room fell silent, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a physical force. Jake took a deep breath, his mind made up. A new beginning. Jake stood in the blinding glow of the core, his entire body trembling with the weight of his choice. The distress beacon slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor. Its blinking light faded into darkness, and with it, any hope of rescue. This was it. He turned to Era and Luna, their glowing forms now sharper, almost crystalline in the core's intense light. "If I do this," Jake said, his voice steady but laced with unease, "you'd better be right. Because if this kills me, I'm taking you both down with me." Luna's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, though her eyes remained sharp. "You won't regret this, Jake." Era stepped forward, her expression a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "We'll guide you through it. You won't be alone." Jake clenched his fists, forcing himself to take the first step toward the core. The light seemed to grow brighter with each step, its pulse sensing with the beat of his heart. By the time he reached it, the heat was unbearable, and the air felt thick with raw energy. "What do I do?" Jake asked, his voice strained. Era and Luna flanked him, their glowing hands resting lightly on his shoulders. "Let go," Era whispered. "Let it in." The bonding. Jake closed his eyes, bracing himself. The moment he opened his mind, the core surged toward him, its energy slamming into his chest like a tidal wave. He gasped, every nerve in his body alight with fire. Images flooded his mind again. His childhood, his first space flight, the faces of everyone he'd ever loved. But now, the visions shifted. He saw Era and Luna's memories, their world before it began to collapse. Towering spires of glowing crystal, vibrant skies alive with swirling colors, a people filled with purpose. And then, the devastation. The core's first failure, the desperate attempts to save it, the loss. Jake cried out as the core dug deeper, peeling back every layer of who he was. He felt exposed, vulnerable, yet impossibly strong. His body felt like it was dissolving, only to rebuild itself in ways he couldn't comprehend. Through it all, he could feel Era and Luna, their energy entwined with his. They weren't just guiding him. They were becoming a part of him. Rebirth. When the light finally dimmed, Jake collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. His body felt different, stronger, lighter, but also strange, like it no longer fully belonged to him. He looked down at his hands and gasped. They glowed faintly, the same crystalline shimmer that covered Era and Luna. "What? What did you do to me?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. "You're not just human anymore," Luna said, her tone softer than usual. "You've become something more, a hybrid of your species and ours. You are the first of your kind." Jake staggered to his feet, his body tingling with unfamiliar sensations. He could feel the core inside him, its rhythm now steady and strong. The ship itself seemed alive in a way it hadn't before, its walls pulsing in harmony with his heartbeat. "I feel everything," Jake said, his voice filled with awe. He could sense the core's energy flowing through the ship, extending far beyond it, connecting to the remnants of the alien world outside. For the first time, he understood the magnitude of what he had become. The core's gift. As Jake adjusted to his new form, the sisters watched him carefully. Era stepped closer, her glowing hand hovering near his chest. "The core is stable now, thanks to you. Our world has a chance to rebuild." Jake nodded, but his mind was already racing with questions. What about Earth? Will this connection affect it? Era hesitated. "The core's energy won't harm your planet. In fact, with you as the bridge, Earth could benefit from its stabilizing force. Your world could grow stronger, just as ours will." Jake's jaw tightened. "And me? What happens to me now?" "You are tied to the core," Luna said, her tone matter-of-fact. "You can never fully return to your old life. But you have a choice. You can stay here and help us rebuild, or you can return to Earth, carrying the core's energy with you. Jake stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. His old life felt distant now, like a dream he could barely remember. Could he go back? Could he ever truly belong on Earth again, knowing what he had become? A new purpose. As he weighed his options, the ship shuddered faintly, the walls glowing with renewed vitality. Jake looked around, realizing the core's energy was already spreading. The alien world outside, once barren and lifeless, now pulsed with the beginnings of renewal. "I don't know if I can be what you want me to be," Jake said finally, "but I'll try." Era smiled, her glow brightening. "That's all we could ask for." Luna stepped forward, her expression softer than he'd ever seen. "You're not alone anymore, Jake. Whatever happens next, we're with you." Jake took a deep breath, feeling the core's energy pulse through him. For the first time since the crash, he felt at peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that could change worlds. As he gazed out at the alien horizon, the core's light shining behind him, Jake realized his journey was just beginning.